Hi, we're going to talk about what WordPress is. WordPress is a content management system, meaning that the content on your website or web application can easily be changed even by the client. So you don't have to go back in and do as much maintenance. It makes it a little bit easier for them to actually do the editing just in the areas that you want them to edit, which is nice. It's also about content being changed, created, stored, and distributed by the CMS itself. So the CMS is going to kind of do the heavy lifting of doing that for you and makes that kind of a smooth process for you. Now, there are other CMSs out there. WordPress is not the only one. However, it is by far the largest one out there. It makes up the vast majority of all of CMS sites out there. There are two other ones that are in second and third place called Joomla and Drupal. But even with those two combined, they make up less than 10% of all the CMS sites out there. So WordPress is really huge. Some of other CMSs you might have heard of, like Shopify or Squarespace, they're even smaller than Drupal and Joomla, but they are growing in popularity, but they're very, very small percentage of all the CMSs out there. So WordPress is by far the big leader in this area, and that's why we're going to focus on it. It's also considered a web-based publishing application. So it's an application that's going to help with the process of publishing your content onto the network as well. So that's what in general a CMS is, and then we're going to go on and learn the WordPress CMS. Okay, so where do we start with WordPress? Lots of people will just go to WordPress.com and start that way. But be aware, WordPress.com for professionals like we would be is not the place to go. That's where a beginner or a novice would go to work with WordPress. So WordPress.com is a commercial enterprise that's going to distribute WordPress as a hosted service. So when we get in depth and we write our own plugins and write our own themes and things like that, you can't use any of that with WordPress.com. This is for novices who don't know anything about web development and need to be stepped through the process. It's also going to involve some sort of fee, probably. You'll also see with your different hosting companies that you will host remote service space from will offer this service to you as part of the hosting and domain and things like that. That's not something you want to do with them either. They're using the same kind of commercial enterprising hosting service that's going to cost money. So we want to avoid that one altogether because we're going to learn a little more in depth and be able to understand it the right way and do it completely free, and that's through WordPress.org. WordPress.org hosts the WordPress open source project. It's going to include all the application that we need to install it, all the files that we need. It's going to also have forums and development information. We're going to download all of our WordPress files from here, and this is how we're going to be using WordPress. It's completely customizable. When you create your own themes, you can use those just fine doing it this way. And like I said, it's completely free. You're not going to be charged anything using WordPress.org. So we'll definitely want to go that route. Okay, let's look at some advantages of WordPress. I, at this point, knowing WordPress, would probably still build my own site from scratch and not use WordPress. I've found too many disadvantages, but there are a few that I do like. But know that all of these, like especially this first one, client editing, you can create on your own, either like using PHP or something like that quite easily once you know a little bit of back end. So the big advantage for a lot of people is they want to build a website for a client, and the client wants to be able to maintain that himself or herself. They want to be able to change content on the pages. They want to add their own new pages, maybe. And then you won't have to go back and do as much maintenance and updates for them. And so this is a really nice feature that's a big advantage of WordPress. But again, like I said, you can always do this yourself as well if you knew PHP. Okay, the other advantage is they have some really pretty themes that are all laid out and beautiful and have a lot of really neat features on them that look really great and professional that are just completely already designed for you. So your layout development time is going to be super short. But there's a disadvantage to that we'll cover here in a minute too. Then WordPress was built for blogs. And so if you have any sort of blog features where you need comments from people and to do anything with blogs, it's a really good place for that as well, because that's kind of what it was built around. And you'll see with a lot of the themes, there's already blog features built into it. All right, disadvantages. And I think for me, there's more disadvantages than advantages. There are a lot of security risks with WordPress. It is very targeted. Like I said, it has so many sites out there that use WordPress that it is a big target for many hackers. They know how to get into these sites unless you're very, very careful. So we'll go over a lot of security with WordPress to make sure that we aren't a target. WordPress can also carry a lot of bloat with it, meaning it's got a lot of features that you might not need, a lot of code and maybe even backend that you're never going to use, and some of the themes can load really slow. You'll have to find themes that can load fast and maybe even plugins that will help with speed, but it can have a little bit of bloat if you're not careful. Plugins, I've seen a lot of students have problems with plugins. You need to be really careful with them and make sure you get really good plugins. Try not to use them if you don't have to, because sometimes the theme will update but not the plugin, and there'll be all sorts of problems. So be careful with plugins. The customizing the theme can be difficult. So it's got this pre-set up beautiful layout for you that we'll see with some of the themes. However, if you want to make a major change to how that's laid out, sometimes it's not as straightforward as it seems, and it can be a real pain. They do let you customize a lot of things, but when you try to get down to the technical, some big kind of changes, it can be kind of difficult there and cause a lot of time and effort that you might as well have just created a website from scratch on your own, in my opinion. But WordPress is something that you guys need to know, even with the disadvantages. It's used a lot out there, and some companies, that's all they use as web developers for clients. So it is something important that you should know. Okay, so how does WordPress work? It is a little different than a normal website. If you guys will be learning PHP and some of the backend, but it does use that PHP backend to make their pages very dynamic. And when you go in, it's going to need 3 things to work. It's going to need the WordPress application, which comes from the files that we're going to download from WordPress.org. It's going to need a web server that's using PHP and MySQL, and it's going to need a database to hold all the content. And we're also going to be using WordPress content with our theme as well. So if you look at the diagram here, we're going to go and download some files from WordPress.org. They're going to represent how you're going to install that in the actual application itself. You're going to put that onto a server that you have set up an empty database on. And so as you build your site and start putting content into it, the content is actually going to be stored in the database. So you're going to have kind of this theme that's going to come with it. It's already got the layout and everything with it. And then any plugins or widgets, we'll talk about what those are later, that also work with it. So it's getting its content, it's calling its content from the database, kind of like a template that would go out then and call in and bring in the different PHP information from the getting the information from the database to plug into each of the pages. So your database is a really important part of your WordPress file. So it's a little different where you have to create that empty database to begin with, and then WordPress uses that to put all of the content into. And then depending on what theme you use, that will depend on what your site will look like and how it will function, as well as the plugins and widgets that you might choose. If you want a little more detail about how it works beyond what I've given here, it can get quite technical. I would go to, let's see, I've got the file here. I would go to WordPress Beginner, wpbeginner.com. Okay, so it's wpbeginner.com, and it's wp-tutorials/how WordPress actually works behind the scenes -infographic. So kind of a long URL there, but I really liked, they had a cool little infographic that kind of steps you through how WordPress works behind the scenes, and what files it'll load, and we'll see some of these files as we're doing backups and things like that, and how it opens up the database and uses that to load the content and different things like that. So it's actually kind of a cool little infographic, and it also has just the text stepping you through how it does some of the different things. So that it would be a good place to go if you want to know a little more about how it's working behind the scenes with WordPress.